This is apropos. European countries, including France, have begun deploying troops to Greenland in what Germany describes as a mission aimed at countering Russian and Chinese threats. The White House says the show of unity for the Arctic island will have no impact on Trump's ambitions for it. It comes a day after high-level talks in Washington highlighted fundamental disagreements over the future of the Danish territory. With the latest, here's Catherine Viette.
A European show of solidarity for Denmark and Greenland. In an address to the military, France's president says the bloc has a responsibility to act.
In Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, Europeans have a particular responsibility because this territory is part of the European Union, and this territory is also part of our NATO allies.
The tough talk comes after the foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland characterized the outcome of meetings with the U.S. as "we agree to disagree." President Donald Trump is pushing his claim that Washington needs Greenland for national security, and that if it doesn't get it, China or Russia will. For now, Europe's priority is to deflate those claims by showing that it can handle security concerns. EU leaders are hoping that a united front and some military flexing could help deter Washington's interest. But there is a risk that escalating the situation will make a land grab by Trump more likely and not less.
The feeling I would describe this morning in Europe and in Brussels, the realization of the seriousness of the US threats to Greenland and Denmark and to Europe and NATO has descended across the continent because it was very clear that America means business.
There is also the hope that Trump becomes distracted with another global crisis. Europe knows the American president can have a short attention span and that long-term planning and follow-through are not his strengths. In the meantime, Denmark, along with its European allies, hopes that diplomacy will ultimately win the day. They say they are cautiously optimistic after Copenhagen and Washington agreed to set up a working group to explore ways of managing their differences.
For more, we're joined now by Lucas Wadden, author and associate fellow with the Russia program at George Washington University. Thanks so much for being with us on the program. Firstly, what kind of message do you think European nations are actually trying to send here by deploying troops to the island? Donald Trump doesn't seem to be hearing it. The White House saying it's not really going to make any difference to his thinking.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. I think it remains a bifurcated message. Essentially, on the one hand, the European allies of Denmark and Greenland are continuing to try to communicate to the Trump administration through the deployment of additional troops to Greenland that they are willing to shoulder a part of the burden in defending the island, in assuring Allied Arctic security. On the other hand, I reckon a part of the idea of sending actual troops onto the ground is also to at least implicitly raise the cost of a potential US move on the island. Of course, the presence of not only Danish and Greenlandic soldiers, but soldiers from other NATO allies might make it much less likely for there to be any type of US military action. In the end, though, I think it's important to keep an eye on the official communications that have been coming out of the ministries of defense of the European NATO countries, which all have made it very clear and have made a great effort to underline that these deployments occur within the context of NATO and that they will also be coordinated with American partners, even though, as has come out today, the exercises that they will participate in will occur under the command of Copenhagen directly and not of NATO command. So a slightly contradictory messaging, slightly contradictory purposes, but I think that befits the messiness of the situation as a whole.
And Lucas, the numbers being deployed here are very small, I think it's fair to say. How many would actually be needed if it did come to a situation where Europe were trying to deter the US from moving in on Greenland with military force?
I think it is understood to everybody in Europe that it will be impossible to deter the United States militarily from attacking Greenland should anybody in the United States truly so desire. the deployment of these troops on the one hand is symbolic. The presence of troops from different allied countries is supposed to, in a very symbolic sense, raise the bar and heighten, in a sense, or increase the possible diplomatic ramifications, the negative diplomatic fallout of a potential encounter. On the other hand, it's perhaps also important to mention that many of the troops sent by countries such as Germany are actually reconnaissance troops. They are highly trained special units that are sent to specific difficult terrain to map out the preconditions for the deployment of larger numbers of troops, which presumably will occur in the future, again, for the purpose of, on the part of European NATO allies, showing that they are committed to assist Denmark in the safeguarding of the security of Greenland.
Yeah, and the French foreign minister said earlier that Arctic security is inseparable from European security. Do you think that is really the case? And what exactly will Europe do to actually defend Greenland?
Arctic security is inseparable from European security, but I think it is important to remember that the Arctic is an immensely large region that is actually composed of several sub-regions. The security scenarios that are being looked at by NATO planners in the North American Arctic differ fundamentally from those in the European Arctic. It is unclear to what degree the meeting of the challenges in the North American Arctic, Greenland and the European Arctic actually require or even would make possible a joint or sort of shared NATO posture. I think the idea that the security of Greenland is intertwined with the security of Europe at this point is symbolic and perhaps even hyperbolic to a certain degree. Should it come to anything more than a diplomatic conflict over the idea of the United States taking over territorial possession of Greenland, that would most certainly, especially in the case of military altercations, spell some kind of at least severe damage, if not the end to NATO, and would therefore withdraw the fundament of the European security architecture as a whole. And I think it is the statement that Greenlandic and Arctic security in that sense are intertwined with European security is best understood in that context.
And Lucas, Germany described this mission today as being aimed at countering Russian and Chinese threats. Now, Moscow has dismissed any notion that it poses a threat here as a myth, but hasn't it been building up its military presence in and around the Arctic? To what end is it doing that?
Well, look, to be perfectly honest with you, this is a very sensitive topic. It is true that the Russian military and the Russian Federation in general has vastly rebuilt its military presence in the Arctic, but that's the Russian Arctic. That's a part of the world that is many thousands of kilometers away from Greenland. The statements concerning Russian and Chinese military interests in Greenland are, I think, to be read in the context of meeting or engaging with the statements put out of the Trump White House. President Trump himself has spoken on several occasions of Russian and Chinese boats, Russian and Chinese military and political interest in Greenland. It is unclear to Arctic security experts, generally to the expert community, what type of military presence the president refers to in this case. The seas around Greenland are not necessarily the place in the Arctic where Chinese and Russian military exercises have been most concentrated. That would actually be on the other side of the North American continent in the Bering Strait. But again, much of what is happening on the part of the European decision making right now is damage control. It's an effort at communicating to the Americans that their concerns, and in particular the specific concerns of the president, whether they are deemed reasonable or not in European capitals, are taken seriously. And if the president's threat perception of a Russian and Chinese role in and around Greenlandic security, or Russian interest in or Chinese interest in Greenlandic security figures into that, then I think from the point of view of decision makers in Europe, at this point, so be it.
Lucas, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us, though, on the programme this evening. That is Lucas Wadden, author and Associate Fellow with the Russia Programme at George Washington University.